three astronauts were 200,000 miles from Earth when an explosion turned their spacecraft into a coffin. With no rescue mission and no second chance, just three men trapped inside a dying machine and a clock counting down to suffocation. NASA was riding high. Apollo 11 had conquered the moon. Apollo 12 had done it again. And now, Apollo 13. Commander Jim Lovell, a calm and precise veteran. This would be his second trip to the moon. Jack Swigert, the backup pilot, pulled in at the last minute, untested on a real mission. Fred Haise, first-time moonwalker. This was supposed to be the highlight of his career. The launch was flawless. Everything was going exactly as planned. NASA wasn't worried. This was routine now. Mission Control in Houston watched the telemetry. The readings were normal, perfect, and boring. For 2 days, Apollo 13 coasted toward the moon.
This little tape recorder has been a big benefit to us in passing some of the time away on our transit out to the moon.
The astronauts joked. They filmed broadcasts back to Earth. They were relaxed. America had already stopped watching. Moon missions weren't news anymore. They were routine. But space doesn't care about routine, and Apollo 13 was about to become anything but boring. April 13th, 9:08 p.m. Houston time, 200,000 miles from Earth. Mission Control asked Swigert to stir the oxygen tanks. Standard procedure.
13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like you to stir up your cryo tank. In addition, I have Shaft and Trunnion
Okay.
for a look at the Comet Bennett if you need it.
Okay. Stand by.
He flipped the switch, and then everything changed.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
5 guidance.
Go, guidance.
We've had a hardware restart. I don't know what it was.
Okay. Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main bus butterbolt, and we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
An oxygen tank had exploded. Not a small malfunction or a warning light. A catastrophic explosion. The spacecraft shook violently. Warning lights flooded the cabin. Pressure dropping. Power failing. Something was desperately wrong. Jim Lovell looked out the window and saw something that shouldn't be there. Gas streaming out into the void. They were losing something critical. In Houston, the room went quiet. Telemetry data started coming in, and it was worse than anyone imagined. One oxygen tank completely destroyed, the second tank leaking rapidly, and fuel cells dying, electrical power failing. Gene Kranz, the flight director, realized what this meant. The command module, their only way home, was dying. Without oxygen, the fuel cells couldn't generate power. Without power, there was no heat, no air, and no navigation. Apollo 13 was transforming into a tomb, and the astronauts were still 200,000 miles from home. Mission Control had minutes to make a decision. The moon landing was over. Now it was about survival. But there was a problem. The command module was dying too fast. They needed to shut it down to save every bit of power for re-entry. There was only one option. The Lunar Module, a tiny spacecraft designed to land 2 men on the moon for 2 days. It was never meant to support 3 men for 4 days. It was never meant to be a lifeboat, but it was all they had. Lovell, Swigert, and Haise crawled into the Lunar Module and powered down the command module. Their home in space went dark, cold, and silent. They were now trapped in a spacecraft the size of a closet, 200,000 miles away from Earth, drifting through the void. And then Mission Control realized that they had another problem. The Lunar Module had enough oxygen and enough power, but it had something else, something deadly. The Lunar Module had carbon dioxide. Every time the astronauts exhaled, they released carbon dioxide into the cabin. Under normal conditions, scrubbers would filter it out. But the Lunar Module's scrubbers were designed for 2 men for 2 days, not 3 men for 4 days. The math was brutal. In less than 2 days, the carbon dioxide would reach lethal levels. The astronauts would suffocate, not from lack of oxygen, but from breathing their own exhaust. And there was another problem. The command module had plenty of spare scrubbers, but they were the wrong shape. Square canisters. The Lunar Module needed round canisters. Mission Control was now facing an impossible equation. 3 men, a dying spacecraft, and incompatible life support systems. Gene Kranz gathered his engineers. His message was simple. We need to find a way to fit a square peg in a round hole. The team had one rule: only use materials already on the spacecraft. Nothing else existed up there. For hours, engineers built, tested, failed, and rebuilt. Finally, they had something. A Frankenstein adapter made of duct tape, plastic bags, and cardboard. They radioed the instructions up to the spacecraft, step by step, piece by piece. In the freezing Lunar Module, the astronauts followed along. Their hands were shaking from the cold, their breath visible in the air. They installed the makeshift scrubber and waited. The carbon dioxide levels began to fall. They could breathe, just for now.
We think we have the situation in control. We've projected the consumables as I've described, and we have a plan for carrying out the rest of the mission, but there's going to be no relaxation at all.
The spacecraft was still dying, and they were still 200,000 miles from home. Inside the Lunar Module, the temperature was dropping. With power shut down to conserve energy, there was no heat. The cabin temperature fell to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. Water condensation covered every surface. It dripped onto instruments. It froze on the walls. The astronauts couldn't sleep. Every movement burned calories they couldn't afford to lose. Every breath was visible. Jim Lovell looked at Earth through the window. So close. So impossibly far. In Houston, Mission Control worked around the clock. No one went home, and no one slept. They were facing the next nightmare, getting the astronauts home alive. Apollo 13 was already on a course that would swing around the moon. Gravity would slingshot them back toward Earth. But the question was, where would they land? The explosion had thrown them off course. They needed to perform a burn, fire the Lunar Module's descent engine to correct their path. But the engine was never designed for this. One mistake, and they'd miss Earth entirely, drift into space forever. They had one shot, no autopilot and no computer guidance. Lovell would have to fly it manually. Using Earth in the window as his guide, Lovell fired the engine. The engine burned for exactly 14 seconds. The data came back. They were on course, but barely, and there was still one final test, the most dangerous part of the entire mission. 4 days after the explosion, Apollo 13 approached Earth. The astronauts were dehydrated, exhausted, freezing, but alive. Now came the gamble. The astronauts had to leave the Lunar Module, power up the command module, and hope it would work. The module had been shut down for 4 days. In freezing temperatures, water had condensed on every circuit board, every wire, if the electronics were damaged. If the water had short-circuited the systems, the command module wouldn't work, and the astronauts would burn up on re-entry. Swigert began the power-up procedure, step by step, praying every system would respond. The command module came alive. Everything worked. But there was one more nightmare waiting, the service module. The part of the spacecraft that had exploded. They needed to jettison it, separate it from the command module before re-entry. But no one knew how badly it was damaged. If debris hit the heat shield during separation, if the explosion had damaged the command module's protective shell, the astronauts would disintegrate on re-entry. The service module released, and for the first time, the astronauts saw the damage. An entire panel was gone, ripped apart. There's one whole side of the spacecraft missing. They had been flying blind in a machine that was one explosion away from killing them for 4 days, and they never knew. The command module began its final descent. "16 minutes until splashdown. The astronauts jettisoned the Lunar Module, the spacecraft that had kept them alive. It would burn up in the atmosphere, never to be seen again. Now it was just the 3 of them, in the command module, falling toward Earth at 25,000 miles per hour. The heat shield began to burn. Plasma surrounded the spacecraft. Temperatures outside reached 5,000 degrees. During re-entry, all communication cuts out. Radio blackout usually lasts 3 minutes. Mission control waited, watching the clock, listening to static. 3 minutes passed, then 4 minutes. No signal. Nothing. Gene Kranz stared at the speaker. Silent. Had the heat shield failed? Had they survived everything, only to die now? Across America, families watched, waiting. The recovery crews scanned the sky. No parachutes, no signal. 4.5 minutes. Still nothing. And then...
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over.
Okay, go. Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great. The recovery, over. Well, one flight in the time, the three shoots are just placed in the water. 503, like that, 3.5 miles, they will get up.
From the start, the exploration of space has been hazardous adventure. The voyage of Apollo 13 dramatized its risk. The men of Apollo 13, by their poise and skill under the most intense kind of pressure, epitomized the character that accepts danger and surmounts it. Theirs is the spirit that built America. Your mission served your country. It served to remind us all of our proud heritage of a nation, to remind us that in this age of technicians and scientific marvels, that the individual still counts, that in a crisis, the character of a man or of men will make the difference.
Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
Extremely loud applause of Apollo 13 on main chutes comes through loud and clear on the television display here.
Apollo 13 wasn't just a survival story. It was proof. Proof that humans can solve the unsolvable. That when everything goes wrong, when systems fail, when death is certain, human intelligence can find a way. A square peg in a round hole. A phrase that became legend because it represented something bigger. The willingness to improvise, to refuse to accept death, to fight. Apollo 13 didn't conquer the moon, but it conquered something harder than the moon itself. The astronauts were 200,000 miles from home, inside a dying machine, with 1 million ways to die, and they survived, not because of technology, and not because of luck, but because of human beings who refused to give up. 3 men went to space, and space tried to kill them, but humanity brought them home. And now, the question that haunts every space mission, every astronaut who ever looked up, every human who ever dared to leave Earth. If you were 200,000 miles from home, trapped inside a machine with no second chances, knowing that every breath might be your last, would you have kept fighting? Or would you have accepted the silence?